that was not an opportunity that either of us could have seen, but it came because he was developing his, what I call the constellation of gifts. He had a natural ability at baseball. He had a natural ability in all things kind of technical, and he had this interest in statistics. It wasn't one thing that he excelled at beyond everyone else in his class. And I think that's where sometimes as parents, we fret when we see that our child isn't the best at something or even the best at everything. We kind of see that how can they succeed because this world, it feels like it's so competitive and it feels as though they have to be like the best at least something.
Welcome to Real Talk with the Parenting Blueprint Coaches, where we discuss all aspects of parenting using the foundation of understanding personality dynamics to raise independent, responsible, and resilient children. My name is Karen Wagden, founder of Teaching Our Youth and the Parenting Blueprint. Let's dig right in with today's topic and have some real talk with the Parenting Blueprint Coaches. So when was the last time you were truly curious about your child? I mean, not curious about what they're doing or why they won't listen to you, but really curious about who they're becoming. You know, it's so easy to slip into parenting from an expectation. You know, we're expecting certain grades, we're expecting certain behavior, we're even expecting certain interests. But when we lead with curiosity instead of control, something powerful is going to happen. We begin to see the child for the unique human being they really are. Hi there, my name is Karen Wagden. I'm hosting today's Real Talk with the Parenting Blueprint Coaches, where we are going to explore what it means to really parent with curiosity. And my guest today is Karen Summerville, also known as the Parent GPS. And she's here to share with us ways to navigate out of that expectation trap and into a space where curiosity begins to open the doors of connection, discover, and even deeper understanding with our kids. So if you ever caught yourself saying, I just don't understand my child, I have no idea what they're going to do with their life, this conversation is for you. Karen, I am so excited to have you back on with me today. You know, you and I have spoke a number of times over probably the last year, because we do have a lot of similarities in our approach. I come from the personality, you come from the constellation of strengths. And so I'm really excited about bringing this topic to our listeners today. But before we jump into that, would you be willing to share a little bit about your journey? Because you are actually an attorney who then became a career coach. And how did that influence your approach to parenting?
Well, thank you. And I'm delighted to be here and to share what I have learned over this very long journey myself, because I was an attorney for over 10 years. I then became a career counselor, mostly for lawyers. And during that time that I was a career counselor, I was also raising my two boys who both became professional athletes, which was surprising to me because I actually believe that I have negative hand-eye coordination. So going back to, I practiced law. I was a partner in a downtown Seattle litigation firm, and it was challenging. It's a very tough profession, being a litigator, being an attorney, but it worked until I had our first son. And once I had Peter, the world kind of changed for me and how I viewed it. And I realized that I couldn't be the wife and mother that I wanted to be for him if I continued as a litigator. So I worked with a career counselor, and surprisingly, I came to the conclusion that what I really wanted to do was what she did. I loved what she was doing and helping me explore what might be an alternative that would bring me more joy and less of the, days were just so hard, and I couldn't be present for my son with the constant kind of hammering of deadlines that I had as a litigator. So with her guidance, I actually went into the managing partner's office and resigned my partnership, it took a while for me to get up the courage to do that. But once I did that, I freed myself to develop a program for, it was mostly for attorneys, but professionals, how to help them discover, in most cases, it wasn't an alternative to the practice of law necessarily, but a different way of practicing law, because what they found was they couldn't really just step away. It would be too financially, just couldn't do it. So coming up with practical ways for them to find a path where they were doing something that they were actually good at, they enjoyed doing it, and they were proud of it when it was done. That was kind of the goal. And over the course of the next 25 plus years, I helped over 1,500 professionals discover what I called success and satisfaction. And I still have contact with many of them to this day. Some of them are coming to me with their kids and saying, okay, now let's meet. And I want you to be in this conversation that I'm having with them. And so that was, back then. Now I have two grown sons, the oldest of whom is 33 and is he's still in baseball. He's the major league coordinator for a game coordinator for the San Diego Padres. And my youngest son is now a father, and he has left baseball, and partly because his gifts were really not. He was a very gifted baseball player, but he really wanted to have a normal life and not the rigors of being in professional baseball. So he now is a wonderful father to his almost 2-year-old daughter, and I couldn't be more proud of him, as I
Wow.
am of both of them. And they've taken very different directions.
That I loved your story because you and I have talked about this in the past and the journeys that our kids have taken and how they actually got to that place. And what I had learned from you about your journey has really helped me to see my kids through a different lens. And so, why do you believe that our curiosity about our kids can be so powerful? I here at the Parenting Blueprint, we come from the approach of understanding the personality. In other words, their natural strengths, how they're born, and what their passion may be, whatever industry. And for your boys, it was sports and baseball, to find their purpose or find their place. I always feel that, if we understand what our strengths are, we can always find somewhere in that industry that our strengths can be used. But you approached it from a different place of curiosity. So share a little bit about that with us, that how you've seen those shifts from just being
Well,
kids.
yeah, well, so it starts with, so when my boys were growing up, I was in the peak of my career as a career counselor for lawyers. So my days were spent in an office. I would meet with my clients behind closed doors, and they would share with me how unhappy they were practicing law. And it was for lots of different reasons. Sometimes they weren't in the right practice area. Sometimes it wasn't the right firm, but all kinds of reasons. But they didn't come to me to tell me how happy they were in their profession, obviously. And so the natural question for me to ask them was, well, why did you go to law school? And often it was, my parents wanted me to be a lawyer. And behind that was often one or both parents were lawyers, or they might have been the first one in their family to go to college. They had now the opportunity to become a lawyer. They were the pride of their family and their community. So, and then I would leave the office and I would go home to these two boys and think, okay, now I don't want to make that mistake. I'm not, and I never wanted them to be lawyers. My husband and I were both lawyers. We both, the community's perception was probably that we were successful lawyers, and my husband continued to be a lawyer until he retired. But for me, I knew that I wanted them to do what it was that they were born to do. Having seen my clients and seeing the sometimes desperation that they were feeling, having been kind of shown this opportunity by their parents and not being given the opportunity to become who they were born to be. So I approached it from, okay, I am going to be curious about my child. I'm going to set aside those expectations. But I have to tell you, I wasn't entirely successful in doing that. There was, I can tell a story about what expectation I had for Peter, but I was supportive of their love of baseball. So it was clear that that was the one thing that, and they both were very good students. I think it would have been different if they had only shown up at the baseball field and they didn't really show up for their classes. They didn't take school seriously. And I've seen that where some families, it's like, well, he's going to be a professional baseball player, so we don't need to really stress the academics. And that's hard because there are so many reasons why you might not make it to being a professional baseball player. So I would support that. But even though I was allowing their curiosity, being curious about their baseball, there was a kind of a limit to that from what I can see now, because my oldest son, Peter, had this daily ritual. And we're looking back at it, it was so precious, but I didn't see it the way I see it now. And so what Peter would do every single morning is he would get up early and he would grab the newspaper from the front step. He would bring it into the house. He would take out the sports section. He would lay it on the dining room table. Then he would go into the kitchen, make himself a bowl of cereal, come into the dining room, and he would study this sports section as he was eating his breakfast. And I would be in the kitchen and I was fretting because to me, the sports section was kind of like the comics. And I wanted nothing more than for Peter to read the literature, to read the novels, to read history, and to be interested in something that was more intellectual than the sports section. And so I never asked him, what is it that you find so interesting? I never pulled up that chair, which I wish now that I could go back. If I had the opportunity, I would pull up a chair next to Peter and just ask him that, because what I probably would have learned is, Mom, I'm studying the statistics. I'm studying these players. I'm studying. And so in middle school, he was preparing himself for a job that didn't exist until after he was out of college. The job, none of us could have seen that. And I was fretting because I'm thinking, what will he ever put on a college application? I mean, there's not a lot here to work with. And of course, he ended up with a baseball scholarship and he studied finance. And now he's in a position where he is a data analyst and a bullpen catcher and a pitching coach for the San Diego Padres, which that was not an opportunity that either of us could have seen. But it came because he was developing what I call the constellation of gifts. He had a natural ability at baseball. He had a natural ability in all things kind of technical, and he had this interest in statistics, it wasn't one thing that he excelled at beyond everyone else in his class. And I think that's where sometimes as parents, we fret when we see that our child isn't the best at something or even the best at everything. We kind of see that, well, how can they succeed because this world, it feels so, it feels like it's so competitive, and it feels as though they have to be like the best at least something in order to succeed. And what I've discovered is no, they need to be good at a lot of different things. And they need to have different interests and be proud of their ability to do those different things. And it's the magic that happens when they put those together in what I call the constellation of gifts. And so Peter's job now brings together this whole, these things that I was worried, he's not the best in his class in computer science. He's not the best on the baseball field. He's not the best, but he was good enough at each of these different things to put them together in a meaningful way in a position that didn't exist when he was even in college. And that's going to be more true going forward. The jobs that our kids what the kids who are growing up now are going to have, we can't even imagine them. Not only do they not exist, but we can't imagine them. And so we want to raise our children in a way that we are curious about their different interests, even when it's not one where we think, I knew that Peter wasn't going to be a Major League Baseball player. It was pretty obvious. I didn't ever tell him that. Of course, I think in some ways, I think he knew that too. but he still loved baseball enough to pursue it and find a way to have a really meaningful job and a good, profession that he kind of created for himself by putting together those gifts that he was born with.
That's fascinating, and I just want to kind of take it back to even some of our listeners and even myself as a parent. Is you've used this word, the expectations,
Mhm.
and having worked with those 1,500 attorneys who you heard a reoccurring theme of, it was almost the expectation because the parents
Mhm.
were that they would not even being curious enough to find out if that's what they really wanted. And as our children who want to please us and do things to please us, it's kind of like you're just on that track. And then you get to that point and you said, but no one really ever asked me, right? No
Yeah.
one ever asked me. and
Yeah.
and I could see myself doing that same thing and trying to guide my kids. I was perceptive enough to recognize that they weren't cookie cutter kids. It wasn't one size fits all. They each had different strengths in their personality. They had different interests in the things that they did. Kyle was very singular. Kyle was not a good team player because Kyle had to do things a certain way. So if Kyle was going to be a sport, I was just thinking back that even when he went to camp, like he was like bow and arrow, you know what I mean? Challenge himself to hit that target over and over and over again because it was a him thing, challenge him thing. Same thing when he started shooting guns at the range, you know what I mean? He would challenge himself, but he was not a good team player because he would
Mm.
complain about everybody all the time. And I was like, nobody liked him. And Eric was much more team oriented. Like they were just totally different kids in their approach and their style of doing things. And so, how do we target them into something that's going to challenge them, but then
Mhm.
give them a purpose? So, just reflecting back on those things, but being, as you're saying, curious enough to explore what could that look like. And you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. The jobs that we see today with technology moving so quickly, we can't even imagine what those jobs are going to be with as fast as tech and AI is moving our industries. There are jobs, like you said, that aren't even on the radar that our kids are going to be stumbling into. But being curious enough to explore what that could look like with them instead of taking what a lot of parents of your clients may have been is the safe route,
Right.
because this is what
Right.
we know, only to find out they hate their life.
Right. Right.
And now
Well,
I have to, in my midlife, when I've got a family and responsibilities, I have to turn this around. So what, in your experience, what would this parent curiosity look like today for our parents, for our listeners right now who are struggling with kids who don't seem motivated or don't seem to have an interest in any one thing per se? But what would that look like day to day for a parent who's listening now?
well, one of the things that, looking back at the clues that we get, it's looking for those times when our child is genuinely interested in something to the point of, I would say, even frustrating themselves to get better. That's probably one of the primary clues because if a child, and sometimes a child is born with something that they're naturally good at, but they don't really have an interest in it. And so they don't necessarily want to get better at it. And this can be very frustrating for parents because they see that, my child is a gifted and fill in the blank and they don't want to do it. Well, we can't really force that. We have to stand back and say, okay, what is it that they're both are they have some natural ability for, and they really are, like you talked about your son just wanting to get better and just really kind of challenging himself.
Challenges.
And that's excuse me, that's when we really see the magic happen, is when they are willing to frustrate themselves.
So just being curious and asking questions and
Mhm.
exploring. I mean, is that how you would recommend just not
First,
being
it's
critical? Because I know there were times, and my daughter Anna was a dance and theater major, right? like, and just like with sport, like the percentage of people who actually really make it is it's slim. And so I didn't want to squash her dream, but I just kept saying, so where do we go next? And what would that look like? And she's 4'10". And, so she, there were some things like, you're saying about your son, may never have been a professional player. I knew that Anna wasn't at a size that she would ever be in a dance company at her size. Like we know those things, but I didn't want to squash it. But I did want to, I guess at that point, not even knowing, I was being curious, and just investigate with her, what are your opportunities and where would that go and how would that work out? And, just kind of exploring with her instead of saying, no, that's not it, take this turn. I didn't want to tell her what to do, but I was willing to walk with her to figure out what would this unfold to be, and help her find a way. And she did. She didn't end up with a company, as you know. She did end up dancing professionally with the Detroit Pistons for 4 years and opened up a lot of other things after that. But I didn't know. And as you're saying, you don't have the eye and hand coordination. I'm 2 left feet. I could not. I was not a dance mom. I can't carry a tune. I mean, and this girl had a talent that I was like, okay, well, this is actually pretty good. People tell her it's good. They're opening doors for her. I didn't know how to navigate her through that, but I did stay open to learning and not, close the door on that. And for me, thinking dance and theater, like, what do we do with that? What is the security and what happens when your body doesn't, continue on? Like, I was all worried about the future things when it was all going to take care of itself in the end, right? But as parents, I can see how I could have been putting a lot of pressure and causing stress and anxiety on her instead of just letting it unfold.
Yeah.
As you did with your son, to see where, just reading the paper where you're saying, why aren't you reading about the current events and reading this and reading that, and just seeing where it goes, because trusting that, like you said, with the GPS and even with my faith, that God's going to orchestrate this path anyway. You know what I mean? And I'm just going to sit here and be the one to support them with whatever that looks like. And so how does a parent like you and I, because we're a little bit more on the task side of the model, right? And we want to have an agenda, we want to plan it out. How do we differentiate from that, from the expectation to being curious,
Well, I think one thing, and I didn't know this quote until actually researching kind of for my book, which I'm going to be writing and hopefully publishing in the next year and a half or so, because I'm really at the beginning stage. But there's a great quote by Billie Jean King. And when young people would ask her what they should do, these young tennis players, they were looking to her for guidance. And she told them, learn the business of tennis. And so when we have a child who dance, music, art, and we're more practically oriented, we're looking at the world through a lens of, I want my child to have security. I want them to be, I want them to have success. Yes, I want them to be happy, but I also want to know that they can provide for themselves. And that's coming from a place of love. But if we look at it then from, okay, my son, he loved baseball. And if I thought of it only as, I'm only curious about what he could do as a major league player and only saw that as the only avenue for success in baseball, then of course I probably would have wanted to have shut it down and had him head in a different direction. But instead, if we approach it from, what is the business of baseball? Because really, I mean, just about anything that our child can love to do is, at its roots, it is a business as well. Yes. I mean, baseball is a huge business. Dance is a business. Art, I have friends whose daughter studied art, and now she is with one of the largest art dealers in New York City. And so she doesn't create art; she helps sell art. And so there are opportunities that we will miss if we try to steer our child to a more practical kind of avenue.
What we think is practical, Yeah, it was the same thing with Anna, because after like 26, 27, like dancing was getting to be a little bit more taxing on her body. She was going out of her teen body into her almost a mommy body. Her bodies are changing, but her choreography, and so she does choreography now, right? You know what I mean? Yeah. And people love her stuff. She's talented, she's gifted. The way she does her music, like you said, there's so much, and I didn't see that side of her until I started to see her do choreography, and I'm like, and she's creative too, you know, and not only
Yeah.
is she talented, she was creative in the visual, and you could feel the movement of what she did, and it was just wonderful. And so can you share a little bit of story, maybe, personal or even examples of other clients that took that curious approach, and outside of you and I, because I think we're kind of recognizing in our
Yeah.
own,
Yeah.
but some of the outcomes that they have experienced because they changed their approach.
Yeah. Well, one that comes to mind, and this hasn't completely played out because the daughter in this scenario is still in high school, but this is a friend of mine who has been in the literary world for her entire adult life, and she was with Simon and Schuster. She's been a literary agent. She came from New York to work at Amazon in their publishing world in Seattle, and she has a daughter who is now in high school, I think a sophomore, and she is her love, her genre that she loves is fiction. And so as she was raising her young daughter, she was thinking, here's a time for me. I can share this love of fiction. And she was reading to her the fiction. She was looking at all of the times that they would be able to share this interest that my client or that my friend has. And her daughter really had very little interest in it. What she was interested in was math and science. And this took my friend by surprise because this was not an interest that she could share. And there are a lot of reasons that we want our child to share our interests. And I think one of them is that we want to be wise. And it's hard to be wise when your child picks an interest that you just really don't know a lot about. And so that was the case with my friend and her daughter. And as it turns out now, as they've kind of navigated this, and my friend is so excited because she can see that her daughter is passionate about this, anything math and science. She's talking about wanting to look into medical school. They're looking together at different summer camps that she can do, and maybe even just opportunities for her to further this interest that just kind of for my friend just came out of left field because it was not something that she or her husband had really experienced. And but when we embrace that and realize, okay, I'm not going to be the wise parent who is going to be able to, be the mentor in this because I can't be, then we owe it to our children to find the mentors out there to help them and to explore with them and to learn with them, as opposed to wanting to be that omniscient guide to the future. We need to kind of step back and learn and take that journey with them.
I love what you're saying about helping them find a mentor, because there may be parents that are listening today whose kids' interests are a little bit confusing.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
I didn't like with the whole dance thing. I mean, she was very talented, had a great voice. Loved the theater. She started with ballet, but we knew ballet wasn't going to work because of her size, so she kind of went out and started doing more with musical, and then saw that there was talent there. And I was kind of confused because I love musicals, but
yeah,
like I didn't
yeah,
understand the business. I didn't find out, what would her place be. So
yeah.
how can parents start that conversation without being judgmental? Because I think deep down, as you said, we want to guide them to the safety and security of a career that we know they'll be able to provide for themselves and their family. And so and I know I probably did the same thing, got a little bit more conservative with the way I wanted to guide. So how do you start that conversation
Yeah.
without judgment? Like, what would
Well,
be some verbiage?
yeah. Well, one of the things that I would like to just kind of even back up and suggest is that we talk to their teachers and we talk to people who see our children in contexts that outside of the home, because our children sometimes shine in ways that we don't even know because they present themselves a little bit differently to us when they're with us in the family setting. So I would, I mean, if I could go back in time, I would, instead of in a parent-teacher conference, instead of just asking about where they are in math and science, where they are in reading, I would ask, so what is it that you notice about my child that's a little bit different? That's an interest that they might have that might be different from the other kids in the class. Or what do the other kids in the class look to my child for help with? And just getting this perspective from someone who sees our child through a different lens And then also like for the coaches, for my son's coaches. I mean, I didn't really do this, but I wish that I had was, what do you notice about my child? Are there things that he does as a teammate that might stand out? And I'm virtually certain I would have gotten some really interesting answers from some of their coaches. And I would, and that gives us a place to start in that conversation. And we can even say, I was talking to your coach and he was praising you for doing this, and tell me more about that.
And just guiding through that. And so there still may be parents who get concerned that if we're becoming curious about things that in our minds we don't think are practical,
Yeah.
that we can almost skew that, so I mean, I know I had to be really cautious of that with Anna, because I knew,
Yeah.
just like with baseball, that the percentage of people who make it on Broadway, right, is and it's a hard life, you know what I'm saying, and
Yeah.
you may
Yeah.
still be performing, but you're still waiting tables, and do you want a family, and like they were all the things that I'm already mapping out the next 30 years of her life, instead of just being curious and letting it unfold, letting it blossom, letting it bloom. But so how do you suggest that our listeners can be stay
Embrace that.
positive, right?
Yeah.
When they're
Yeah.
seeing their
Yeah.
child and they're like, "You're absolutely crazy. There's no way that's going to happen," And
Yeah.
how do you and not just squash it, because I knew that as soon as I started to get the perception of being critical about it, that's when
Yeah.
it shut it down. And I
Right.
didn't want to shut it down. I wanted to keep the
Right.
conversation going,
Yeah.
just to explore. But if I did get critical, they became defensive.
Right. Well, I think one of the things that now that I have this much broader perspective about all of this, as someone my boys are now grown, and I see how within, for them to be successful, they have to be able to work with other people who are also successful. So I come from a place of, if I were going to go back into middle school, I wouldn't be so anxious about, is my son the best at
Right.
everything? More of, I want everybody in that class to be successful. And for them to be successful means that they are each tapping into their unique constellation of gifts.
Right.
And so as a parent, it's not my job to make sure that my child excels at any one thing. It's my job as a parent to help my child discover their unique gifts and develop them. And then I don't have to be envious. I think there's, the competitive parenting thing is real. At least in looking back, I can see that. Now, when I get together with the parents of the kids who were in my son's classes, we talk about our children, and there's this sense of pride in the collective success. But that didn't exist then. So I think if I were going to go back, I would look at it from each of our children has the ability to be successful if we help them engage with their unique talents and interests and values. And we really do them a disservice when we layer on this expectation that they be more like us, or that they be the best in their class at whatever the subject is that we kind of hold out as the kind of be all and end all.
Yeah. I think one of the things you said is really powerful, is to tap into those around our kids,
Mm-hmm.
broadening that to find out their perception of our children, and what they see in them. And I don't think I ever really did that, I did it because I didn't know to do that, right? Even though Anna may not be able to be part of a dance company because of her size and those limitations, what were the other things in the industry that she could do? And and it was the choreography, you know what I mean? So now that she's done her dance career with Pistons, and so she does a lot of choreography for dance studios who take her choreography to competition, and they're winning, so they hire her back. I mean, like, I
Yeah.
wouldn't have known that. I would not have
Right.
known that
Right.
she had that underlying talent, on top of the fact that she was gifted in the other, triple threat, the singing, the dancing, and the acting, the whole piece of that, and
Yeah.
not understanding that, and just being able to be able to explore that. I didn't think to do that, to really find the layers. And so you've shared so many wonderful little nuggets today. So maybe what I call little gold bars along the way. But if you had to sum up just one takeaway for parents in a sentence to take away from this on what they could do differently in helping their kids explore their gifts and find their constellation of gifts, what would that be?
It would be curious. Be curious about what it is your child loves to do. What are they willing to do to the point where they even get a little bit frustrated, where they're just going to try day in and day out to get better at it. And it shouldn't be limited to just one thing. We don't look for that one, the constellations. There's only one constellation that has a North Star. The other constellations have there are stars that have some medium bright stars, some, I don't hate to call them dimmer stars, but it's that constellation effect, which actually helps our children succeed in a future that we cannot even imagine.
It is just a powerful reminder that sometimes the best thing we can do as parents is to kind of pause a moment, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And get curious again, right?
yeah,
Get
yeah.
curious because the curiosity helps us trade the judgment for a little bit of understanding. How do I know what you're thinking if I'm not willing to pause and let you speak and tell me what you're thinking, right? Because I would be the one to just direct and correct. That's what I did.
Mhm.
So being curious helps me to have a better understanding, and I'm trading that control for a connection, right? Connecting
Right,
with a child that I do hear you, and frustration for a chance to really see who they are, not just who I think they could be or should be. So
right,
before we rush into the next direction and correction conversation, which is what I would do, let's ask ourselves, what don't I know yet about my kid?
right,
Oh, and what
right,
are they really trying to tell me? And that one question that might just change everything, right?
right.
Just to
Yeah,
better understand, just to
right.
better understand and be curious.
And that leads to a much better relationship with them as they become adults. And ultimately that is what we want. We want to have our children be satisfied in their work, successful, and we want to also have that warm relationship where they share their joys with us, and maybe their children, and so that's ultimately the goal. And we can't get there by being judgmental and having expectations that they be the way that we kind of would imagine them to be as our children. We expect them to be like us, only better. That's not the right approach. They were born in this world to be different than we are. So
Yes, for their own purpose. And
yeah,
so to just think about what don't I know yet about my kid?
right,
What are they
right.
feeling? What do they need? What are they really trying to tell me? As many times as I said, they want to try and please us or live up to our expectations, and especially when they're little. And then when they get adolescence, they do start pushing back a little bit.
Mhm.
But to just be curious and not look at that pushback as being defiant or weaving away from the family. It's just that they're venturing out on their own. And
Yeah,
so Karen, how can
yes,
people get in touch with you? Because this is
yes.
just such a fascinating topic. But if they want to learn more about your philosophy, your framework, how can people get in touch with you?
Well, they can go to my website, which is karensummerville.com, and that's SUMM, like the season, ERVILLE. And they can go, excuse me, I'm sorry, I have this cough, but so they can go to karensummerville.com, and they can actually sign up for my newsletter, the Parent GPS newsletter. And there's also my email address there. So if they have questions and I love to speak, I love to do public speaking. So if they have an opportunity for me to do a webinar for their school or for a youth group, I'm going to be speaking to the parents and grandparents at our church in a few weeks. And so any of those opportunities, I welcome that. And the best place is to go to my website, karensummerville.com.
That's
Thank you.
wonderful. What a great topic to share with parents, especially when kids start getting into adolescence, when they start showing different interest, right? And
Right,
different
right.
things. So, oh gosh, Karen, thank you so much
You're welcome.
for reminding us that the path to connection begins with just being curious, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So,
It's a mindset. It's just
It
changing our
really
mindset.
is. And having talked to you, you've really stretched my mindset. And I've got adult children right now, and still it's the same thing. It's the same, just being curious as they grow in their careers and in their lives. It is just a
Right.
wonderful thing. So I want to thank you so much for sharing with our audience. And if this episode spoke to your heart, make sure that you subscribe to Real Talk with the Parenting Blueprint Coaches and share this episode with other parents or educators who could use a nudge about becoming curious about their kids and their students as well. And until next time, I want you to remember the power of learning to parent by design and never stop being curious. So thank you so much for joining us. Again, Karen, thank you so much for everything. We look forward to the next time. Take care. Bye now.